What's your warrior? Become it in the Army. Whether you want to cure diseases or develop technology the world doesn't know exists, the Army is where all of that can happen. Find out more by contacting your local Army recruiter and follow them on social media at U.S. Army Baltimore. Ask yourself, what's your warrior? And go to goarmy.com/Baltimore to find out. All right, Coach, one more time for us. Is it all right if we if we record this interview?
Absolutely.
John, Liz, okay with you guys?
Okay.
Awesome. So once again, this is Alex Peters from County Sports Zone. Today we have Coach Dustin Mills from James Bennett High School. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I also have John and Liz, and hopefully you guys know by now, but these are my two sports journalist interns. And Coach, first question, nice and easy. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of have a different journey into coaching than others. I haven't been a teacher my entire life. After college, I actually got involved in some other things, work in some other areas, and then always wanted to coach football. I played football in high school. I did not play in college, but I've always loved the sport, was passionate about it. And, so started getting involved with it on a volunteer basis. At least I thought it was going to be a volunteer basis. The first day was volunteer. The second day, the guy who was the paid JV assistant said, well, I can't make the full-time commitment. So I ended up getting paid from the get-go for what that's worth. Paid is kind of a relative term when it comes to public school coaches. But, so I was a JV defensive coordinator for 1 year. Then I moved into being the JV head coach for 5 years. After that, I became the varsity offensive line coach for, I think, 2 years, and then varsity offensive coordinator for 4. And then this will be my first year as head coach, all at James M. Bennett.
Oh, awesome. And for everyone watching, they may not be familiar with the counties. What county is that in?
Wycomico County. So the easiest way to describe it is we're a half hour from Ocean City. You have to drive through Salisbury to get to Ocean City if you're not going through Delaware. So that's where I'm at.
Now, you said this will be so upcoming in the fall. That'll be your first season as head varsity coach?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. So I kind of have the way that we kind of structure the interview is I kind of talk about the things that I feel like we have to talk about first in terms of, the pandemic and everything that's going on. And then later on is when we get to the fun stuff and sports specific stuff. Okay. So with that being said, can we kind of just get your thoughts on what's going on with the pandemic as a whole? And if you have been reaching out and communicating with your players, how have you been able to keep them motivated?
Yeah, I mean, it's something we have to deal with, and we don't even know when we're going to be done dealing with it. We don't know what it's going to look like for the fall. We don't know what it's going to look like for us next week. MPSSA hasn't said anything one way or the other, what we can or can't do. So we're kind of waiting for that to come down the pike so we can kind of go from there. We have about probably 6 to 8 different plans that we've developed for what we're going to do for all this. We just need to get the word go and know what we can and can't do. I kind of look at it this way. We've had weeks where times we haven't had practice, right, because of hurricanes, because of other issues. And I kind of view it as a long extended period of that. Obviously, it's a lot different than that. And we're looking to do some different things offensively and defensively this year that maybe we've done in the past. So it's kind of hampered us on that end. But what we've really been able to do is use that digital learning platform. We've been doing it with our classes, with our schools. We've kind of tagged onto that, and we've set up a kind of a separate football deal through Google Classroom where we've been able to share information, talk about some install stuff, X's and O's, trying to teach them the language of football, so to speak. Mm-hmm. So that's really kind of been the way we've done it. And I've had, I try and check in on 1 or 2 of them every few days, just see how they're doing, make sure that their classwork's staying up and all that stuff. And I get the inevitable videos sent back and stuff like that of guys working out and stuff like that. Early on, we were posting workouts they could do from home, but with kind of the way things turned in our county with the digital learning, we kind of got away from giving them those because I want to make sure that they were getting done what they had to with their classwork. Mm-hmm. I'm a firm believer that you can't, football is an extracurricular, especially in a time like this that no one's been able to understand and deal with. And at the end of the day, if they're teenagers, they're going to go do something physical. They just can't sit for too long before they got to go exercise. So that's kind of how we've reached out to them during this whole pandemic thing. We'll continue to use that medium until we can meet in person. And I think by and large, they're all ready to get back. I think at first there was kind of a novelty to this, people were kind of excited, like, hey, well, we're out of school. It's online learning. But I think that novelty is long worn off. And I think guys are ready to get back to work, ready to just get on the field and just run around with each other and spend time as a team again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, I think that, and I think this is the last question I have in terms of the pandemic and everything. And you mentioned, you have 6, 8, 10 different plans to how you guys want to handle actually coming back.
Yeah.
And before I say it, this is an unfair question. Okay. We know it. All right. We're not looking for anything in particular, but if we put you in charge of handling coming back to school and starting back up sports, what are some of the things that you would really target and want to work on? And again, this is an unfair question, but our thought process behind asking this is maybe somebody has an idea that no one else has thought of. Maybe somebody watching this will say, oh, that's a great idea. Maybe we can incorporate this, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing for me, if I were in charge, is to a certain extent, kind of like what the, governor has done with reopening. There's a certain amount that has to be left up to the local jurisdictions, because what's going to work for Wycomico County may not be what's going to work for Washington County or Frederick County or Montgomery County, wherever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be a certain amount of leeway. Everything we do has to be in line with government regulations. As much as we may or may not like them, we are a public entity and we are required to be like that. So I think that's a factor as well. Some of the things we're looking to do is obviously, right now we're kind of operating under the idea that when we come back, we'll have to limit it to smaller groups. So kind of having those groups set up, looking to pair, group guys accordingly so that guys are working with like guys. Varsity guys work with varsity guys, younger guys work with younger guys, which will really actually allow us to focus more on the development of those younger guys. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes during traditional summer work, coaches want to work with their 1s and 2s on varsity, which I totally understand. And sometimes those 14-year-old freshmen get left behind. Mm-hmm. So this will allow us to really focus in on working with them independently as a unit. Again, some of the rules are going to dictate, maybe looking at running multiple groups at the same times, separated by, I don't know, the school, maybe one group on one side, one group on the other, just to maximize minimize coaches' time, basically. I don't want, if we did groups of 8, 8 players and 2 coaches, if we did 50 kids, we would be there at least 6 hours, and that's not something I necessarily want to ask of my coaches. So kind of trying to find ways to group kids in a way that's time efficient, that maximizes what we can and can't do. I have the fortune of having an assistant coach who works at an athlete training facility. I've also built some close relationships with some of the guys who run some of these private training facilities around here. Guys who have CSCS, NSCA certifications, that sort of stuff. So, we've talked to them saying, hey, what can we do? Kind of working on the assumption we may not even be able to get into our weight room this summer. So what can we do body weight? What can we do, in the confines of outdoor training? We're looking at going to Ace Hardware and just buying a bunch of 50-pound sandbags. You know what I mean? Lifting those enough times over will make anybody strong. Mm-hmm. So things like that, really focusing on mobility. We kind of define mobility not as range of motion, but strength through a range of motion. Flexibility is the ability to move something a long ways. But if I get to the end of my range of motion, there's no strength there, then what's the purpose? Mm-hmm. So this will really give us time to focus on that mobility and building that strength through a full range of motion. Those sorts of things. Keeping it simple in regards to exercises and programming, but trying to maximize what we do have. We're big believers in plyometrics and that sort of stuff. So, this will give us opportunity to work on that. Animal crawls is something we use a lot of that people don't really think about. Not your traditional football wind sprint bear crawls, but actually a range of motion movement and things like that, which typically, again, when you're focused on the weight room, those things kind of fall to the wayside because especially in football, there's the idea of, hey, we got to lift to get stronger. We got to lift to get stronger. And while there certainly is a strength component to football that may or may not exist in other sports, at the same time, I think we overdo that sometimes and we lose some of that. And guess what? There's always going to be guys who are stronger than other guys just naturally. So let's do what we can. We may not be able to go bench heavy. Okay. So what can we do? Well, we can do, a high volume amount of push-ups or something like that. That will actually may not make us as absolute strong, but will make us stronger through our sport, and we're big believers in training sports specificity. We're not going to have our guys go run miles on miles on miles. That's not something. I'm a 270-pound dude. I hate running with a passion. I've former powerlifter / strongman competitor. So I like to lift heavy things. So, we look at what the sport requires. And so we're not going to have them go do that necessarily. Again, this gives us more time to work on that and work on short bursts of energy and change of direction and all those things that I think are really undervalued when you get caught up in your standard football weight room. So it's a really long-winded way of saying, what are we going to do? Well, we're just going to keep it simple, essentially. Keep it simple and build upon the small things.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, John and Liz, do you guys have anything? I don't want to take over the conversation.
One quick thing I have. Did you say this is your first season as a head coach?
It'll be my first season as a head coach. I was actually I have been a basketball head coach here before, and I was the interim head coach in 2000 and I don't remember the year, 17 maybe. Our head coach was having some family health issues, so he had to take a leave of absence for a few weeks. So I was the interim head coach for that time. But this will be my first, full year as the dude, so to speak.
So walking in as your first season as head coach and this pandemic happens, kind of what was your reaction, or how did you change about your thoughts or process of coaching with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I was actually talking to some other guys about that this morning, and how anybody who's taking over a job right now, it's a whole different deal than it would have been last year or next year. I got the job in December. We knew our head coach was retiring, so I had a little bit of time to work, and we had started building some of those things. We were doing standard weight room stuff off season, but once a week we were doing something called Football Academy. A big push we wanted to make with our guys is not just knowing what to do in the confines of a play, but actually understanding the larger game of football, teaching them to speak the language, language that coaches throw around. You go to a coaching clinic and you hear all sorts of phrases, and I'm sure every sport has it. You say things, you talk about things, you use concepts that you go back to your players and they stare at you like, I have no idea what that means, coach. You're speaking a different language. So kind of one of the things we were striving to do was talking about, using that language of football. And, we had our once a week football academy where we started talking basic X and O's, conceptual football, using that language. And we were really doing well. And then, this happens. So fortunately we were able to kind of roll our football academy stuff into that Google Classroom programming. And so we've still been able to maintain that to a certain extent, certainly not at the same volume we wanted. I have a little bit of flexibility simply because I've been with the program since 2007, and everybody, with the exception of incoming freshmen in this program, has some sort of experience with me. So it's not like I'm moving to a totally different school where I have to reestablish who I am and I have to get to meet the players and those sort of things. So I have that luxury. But still at the same time, our previous head coach did a lot of great things, and I want to continue a lot of those great things he did. But at the same time, I'm a different person, and I have things that I want to instill, and it's tough to do that right now. Once we can get back on the field, we can start working on those things. in building kind of the way I see things. But right now it's very difficult. And, it's, I don't know what the outcome is going to be. I tend to think if we had been doing things regularly, I don't even know the date. What is it? June 4th, June 5th, something like that. I would kind of have an idea by now of, okay, here's what the fall is going to look like. Here's who we've got. Here's what we can and can't do. Like, for example, this past weekend, I believe, or maybe it's supposed to be this Saturday, I don't remember, was supposed to be our first major 7-on-7 event. Obviously we're not having that now. So I kind of lose that time to, one, do any sort of install we want to do, but two, to really analyze my guys in the context of play. So we're really going to have to do a lot more come fall camp. But the trick is we don't want to do too much at the same time. And that's what, kind of sucks about this as a new coach. Like, I know what I want to see us do, but at the same time, my guys have to be able to meet us at that point. And, like I just said, at this point in the year, we would already have a pretty solid idea about that. Right now, we have no clue. But I also don't, the nice thing is, like I said earlier, I don't have to deal with the unfamiliarity of the program, of the school, of the administration, of the players, because I've been there for so long that it's already a place I'm comfortable and they're already comfortable with me. So I can't imagine what it would be like if, a new coach has taken over a whole new school and a whole new program. That would be very difficult. Mm-hmm. So I'm lucky I don't have to do that. But it certainly has a significant amount of challenges just trying to put my imprint on the program versus what it's been the past, few years, not 19 years since we had a head coaching change. So, we're certainly trying to, not redirect the boat, but simply maybe change the direction by a few degrees.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that's not what you imagined for your first year to be like.
Not at all, to say the least. Yeah, having 3 months off where we can't do anything, it's kind of a bummer.
So I want to kind of circle back to one thing you said, when you were talking about the ability to, or at least the hope to work in small groups with, some coaches over here, some coaches over there, and kind of the idea where the incoming freshmen would then be able to develop maybe a little bit more. I tend personally to be more of an optimist. So, when I heard you say that, my first instinct was to think about how that development of these freshmen coming in could really impact the program for years to come. And, is that something you've thought about? And if so, obviously we're looking way in the future now, but is that something that you would continue to incorporate?
Oh, absolutely. It's something we've started to kind of do on a very basic level the past couple years. Not directly saying, well, all freshmen will be in a cohort or anything quite like that. But we've really made a push, like in our summer strength and conditioning program. Like, we have programming for the returning guys, and then any incoming freshmen. Or what we get a lot of is we get not a lot, but we get a handful of sophomores who maybe didn't play as freshmen. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we've even gotten juniors or seniors who never played, and for whatever reason they want to come out. And that's awesome, but they certainly don't have the foundation that they might need in the context of the weight room to lift appropriately or to lift safely. So we've always kind of worked with those guys on more of a small group independent basis. Mm-hmm. But now with what we've got going on, we can really take that and run with it. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right about it paying huge dividends for the program. And that's something we sat down as a staff and said we really want to strive to do, not just preseason, but definitely in season, is we want to coach up those younger guys to a point that when they roll over into varsity, we're not missing a beat. Mm-hmm. We're going to try and do that just through the context of what we do in, a lot more combined practices. I know a lot of coaches, have their varsity practices and have their JV practices, and there's not a lot of carryover. We're kind of going to run the opposite way, and we're going to try and have as much carryover as possible. Keeping it safe, obviously, and making sure our JV guys aren't facing off against our varsity ones, because that's just not good for anybody. Long or short story. When I was a freshman, I didn't play football before I was a freshman in high school, and I was living on a Navy base in Spain. And, so football was a little bit, different there in the regards, like we had to fly to other countries to play. And I never even thought about playing. And my buddy across the street was like, hey, why don't you come out and play? So I didn't even go out until I think the second or third day of practice. And, I was just like, football, whatever, I'll give it a try. I've always watched it and enjoyed it, but I don't know how I feel about it. And I think it was like my third or fourth day there, and we're teaching tackling. Great. Well, I have to match up against this guy who was a returning all-conference linebacker who was probably about 6'2", 220. Like, he was just a dude. And I had to try and tackle him. And I was I might have only been 13-year-old freshman, never strength trained. I was just a chubby kid, and I was trying, and I couldn't take him down. And I just remember being so frustrated, I was crying behind my face mask. And I got to thinking, like, I never want somebody else to have to deal with that, because that was a miserable point. Fortunately, I came back the next day, and here I am many years later coaching the game. So when we do our combined stuff, it's kind of a way to tell you that we're going to make sure that guys are facing off against guys that can build each other's confidence, but at the same time that they're getting the same coaching across the board. Because one of the things we noticed, and we've had some tremendous JV coaches here since I've been here, and it's been great. But even still, when we have separate practices, different things, different habits develop. And sometimes when they get to varsity, they have those JV habits, and we got to break them of that and put varsity habits in it. Well, we figure if we can start early and coach them all at the same time, teach them all the same thing, when they're ready to go as varsity players, or heaven forbid, we get a couple guys banged up, a few things happen, and we got to start pulling JV kids up to play in on the varsity level. We want them to be able to step in that day and say, oh yeah, I know what we're doing here. Not a big deal. And they're hitting the ground running. We're a big believer in developing our younger guys, both through independent work as a group so we can focus on their development, but also giving them just as important a role in our entirety of a program, so that they can help develop us as a system. Mm-hmm. Like, one of the main goals I want is, we've had years where we've been really good. We've had years where we've struggled, and I want to have sustained success. Does that mean we'll win a state championship every year? Not necessarily, but each year that we're coming in, people are saying, man, that Bennett squad's a tough program. You know what I mean? And the only way we can do that is developing our freshmen, because we don't have a dedicated feeder system.
Mm-hmm. John, did you have anything? I don't want
to. Coach, during this time off, have you seen anybody step up and be a leader trying to motivate these other players, or have you seen everybody equally motivate each other and kind of be leaders on their own right?
A little bit of both. I have seen some guys definitely, they're sending me some videos or some pictures of stuff of them working with other guys, working with younger guys, which is awesome. But I've also seen, I got a message from a mother this morning, and she was saying that her son can't wait to get back because he has literally worn a Bennett football shirt every day since we've been out, because he can't wait to get back, and he's wearing them out, and that's awesome to see. I didn't ask him to do that. He's not necessarily working with other guys, but he was, just so proud of the program, so excited to be part of the program, that he's wearing his shirts out. And, so I've seen a little bit of both. I've seen guys, bring other guys along with them, but I've also seen these guys kind of be independently motivated. Guys working on their own, because anything we've programmed has all been body weight, because most people aren't fortunate to have any sort of weight system. But then guys saying, hey, that's great, coach, but I've got this weight set up at home. Can you give me something that I can work on there? And I'm like, absolutely. And so we really seen a lot of guys, to answer your question, I would say more self-motivation. But there has definitely been guys who have stepped up and taken some of these other guys with them and have worked on some things independently.
That's awesome. And that really shows the character of the players that you have in your program.
Absolutely.
So the next question I have for you is, I want to know, what kind of coach are you? What are some of your philosophies, and what are you trying to really preach to your players?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever sat down and kind of tried to define myself. But I'm a big character guy. My view of high school football might be different than some other guys. I want to win games. Don't get me wrong. It's tough to enjoy the game when you're losing week in and week out. But at the same time, I also know that this is still just high school football. So what can I do through the context of high school football? Well, we can teach guys character traits. I've been doing this, I don't want to say weekly, but when I do it, called Countertop Conversations. And every time I spend about probably too long, because as you can tell, I'm a little long-winded. but teaching character concepts, and I think those things are important. You hear the word culture thrown around a ton. But what is our culture, and what is my culture? It's character based. At the end of the day, I would rather lose a game and develop great young men than win games and wonder about the quality and character of the young men in my program. That said, I'm a firm believer that if you build the character and you build the culture, the wins will come. You look at most successful places, they have a strong culture and a strong identity, and that success kind of begets success. But they built that culture first. And that's a big thing that I'm striving to push. Is I want to develop great young men who become great husbands, they're great fathers, they're great brothers, they're great sons. You can see a lot of things going on in our world now. And, I look at, I've got a son who's 1 year old, and I look at it and say, where is he going to be in 17 years? At the end of the day, winning football games is great. Everybody wants to feel like a winner on the field. But we're trying to develop winners outside. We're trying to develop winners in the classroom, winners in life. And that's who I am as a coach. Yeah, we know X's and O's. I've got an offensive coordinator who's a great X's and O's guy. Defensive coordinator I've been with. He was my D coordinator when I was a head coach on JV. He's been our varsity D coordinator for 5 years now. Knows his stuff inside and out. There's no doubt about it that X's and O's knowledge is a thing we have. But it's not the thing that matters to us the most. What matters the most to us is building those relationships with those young men so that when they are dealing with things, they say, hey, coach, how can I handle this? And we say, well, here's a skill that will carry you not just through this situation, but through all the next few situations in your life. I don't want them to be the guy sit back and say, yeah, we won some games, but at what cost? I want them to say, you know what, we did pretty well. But I loved being a part of that program because it prepared me to be the man I need to be in modern society, in my family, in my workplace, and all those things. And I really think that high school football is a great vessel for that. I mean, all sports to that matter are, don't get me wrong. But, I'm just biased towards football.
No, I definitely agree with you. And I think that I don't want to say it gets bogged down because obviously winning is important at every level. I think that it really starts when you get to the high school level in the terms of we want to win. And then, you progress further and further throughout college and professional. But I think that the biggest thing, and, you touched on it, is with high school athletes, we're talking 14 to 18 years old, very impressionable people in general. So the ability to, for football in specific, for the ability to grow these boys into men and, really build up their character not only helps the program, but it helps society as a whole. And I think that's really important. And I think with this being your first year as the varsity head coach, however, being within the program, I think that that allows you the ability to already have trust from the players. You step in there and they're going to trust you. They know you. They're going to trust what you're saying is only going to help them. And I think that's a big thing.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I mean, trust is the biggest thing. I was talking to a local reporter yesterday, and a word that I use that probably a lot of football coaches don't use is the word love. I tell my guys I love them at the end of all my countertop conversations. Say, love you guys. Like, to me, that's a big part of it. But in order to have that sort of brotherly love, there has to be that trust as well. Love and trust are simpatico. You can't have one without the other. And, you're absolutely right to your point. Like, I need these young men to trust me, and more importantly, I need their parents to trust me as well. I think that's an under talked about issue in athletics in general, but especially in football is, football is a violent game. There's no way around that. So parents are trusting me with their sons, saying, understanding that I'm going to do my best to keep their son safe, that I'm not going to do something that puts their son in a situation, So that's what we want to make the cornerstone of our program, is that love, is that trust. So, like, hey, trust me on the field, trust me with my coaching decisions, but more importantly, trust what I'm saying philosophically, trust what I'm saying character-wise, because a lot of these character things have been learned through some terrible mistakes in my life. I think that's part of the thing is making them understand, like, this isn't some stuff I read in a book. Like, I made these mistakes. Like, I've learned the hard way. And, so hopefully I can help share some of that knowledge and build that trust and build that love with them so that they graduate when they turn 18 and they're ready to go do whatever it is they want to do, but they're equipped to handle what the world's going to throw at them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we've kind of talked about practice and drills and things of that nature, but what is your favorite drill or thing to do at practice?
What is my favorite drill? That's a great question. My favorite drill is when any drill that happens where guys are learning, but they're also having fun. And I think that's important to understand. I think sometimes as football coaches, we're married to certain, we got to do this drill. And those drills are miserable. I know because I did them when I was in high school, and I know because I've coached them. And I've said, hold on, this is miserable for them. And if a kid is miserable, I guarantee you they are not learning anything. So I don't have one specific drill per se, but it's any drill where guys are enjoying the game and learning. And I think those are important to keep in mind. That, like you mentioned before, we're dealing with impressionable teenagers. It's hard sometimes, especially when you look at some of these kids who are taller and bigger than you, and you're like, dear God, you're a grown man, you're 15. But you know what? He's not a grown man. He's still learning. He's still got a long way to develop. So what can we do to keep him excited about the game of football? And sometimes practice is going to be a little bit miserable. There's no way around that. But any drill we can do to mitigate that and increase the learning is a drill I'm going to love. And, of course, I love, situational football. I love putting the ball on the 10-yard line, saying, hey, we got 4 downs. Let's get competitive. We may have our varsity ones against our varsity next bests, or, whatever we want to do, whatever we're working on a day. But that's one of my favorite times, because that's when you see the guys start to get fired up. Competitive drills are awesome.
And that was going to be my next point. I was going to ask you about that because I was not a football player. I'm a baseball guy through and through. I can only speak from my experience within baseball, but the more competitive things we did in practice were always our more, I look back on more fun practices, or, honestly, the more successful practices. So, I'm glad that you touched on, I think at any level, but especially when you get to the high school level, guys want to compete against each other. So I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah. It's, when you do drills, sometimes drills happen in a vacuum. But as soon as you put a competitive edge to that, then all of a sudden you see guys step up. And it's kind of a natural thing. Yeah, we tell our guys, hey, give maximum effort every rep, give 100%. But again, they're teenage boys. They're going to throttle down. They're going to take snaps off. They're going to take drills off. Or, when they recycle back through the drill, maybe the second time they don't go as hard, or whatever it might be. So how can we get away from that? Well, like you said, you add that competitive edge. You get them going against each other in a friendly, competitive way. I've seen them sometimes get a little too heated, and that's something you gotta control. But at the same time, it absolutely gets the juices flowing. It gets guys fired up. It gets them going. It also teaches them that there is there is a benefit to winning. That when you do something successfully, there is a payoff, and that's something I think that's important for them to learn.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Again, John, Liz, Coach, I have a habit of taking over the conversation for my interview, so I sometimes have to pause.
I completely.
You guys got anything?
No, I'm good.
You good right now? All right, yeah. Coach, this is my favorite question. Okay. So I'm going to make you a mad scientist, okay? I'm putting you in a laboratory, and you get to create your ideal type of player. I'm talking, we can do physical attributes, we can do mental characteristics. We can go, you can do, I want to build a middle linebacker, I want to build a quarterback. I don't care what you do. I just want to hear from the mad scientist himself, what type of player are you building?
All right, so I'm going to build, because I am inherently biased towards this, an offensive lineman.
Okay.
I firmly believe, because in high school ball, if I'm building an offensive lineman, let's be honest, I'm also building a defensive lineman, because I don't know many schools who can 2 platoon. So I'm building a lineman. We'll go with that. We'll just say lineman, right? I firmly believe that's where games are won and lost. I've seen teams with really talented backs who struggle because the guys up front can't get it done. I've seen defenses who had some solid safeties and some all-conference linebackers struggle as a unit because the guys up front just aren't getting it done. So I'm building a lineman, man. I'm building a guy who, physically, we're talking probably 6'2". This is high school ball. If he's 6'7", that'd be great. Let's be real. 6'2", a guy, looking in the 250s maybe, doesn't have to be this massive, overwhelming guy, especially in high school ball. But he's got to be a guy who's quick, right? And he's got to be able to pick things up. He's got to understand the game. But more importantly, and this is, I think, again, why I loved being a lineman. I loved coaching linemen. Like, he's got to have a little nasty streak to him. You know what I mean? He's got to understand that, hey, on offensive line, my job is to put this dude in the dirt. And on defensive line, it's to get past this guy and put somebody else in the dirt. You know what I mean? Not mean, but a little nasty. You know what I'm saying? And lastly, more importantly, he's got to care about the unit, because I think both offensive and defensive line, you are asked to do so many things where your name will never end up in the paper. It may not ever see a stat line, but it wins games. You've got to be a guy who cares about the team first. One of my favorite statistics defensively is quarterback pressures, not sacks. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love a quarterback sack, but it's quarterback pressures. It's times where guys are putting heat on the quarterback, and they may not get that stat of a sack, but they've done something to force a quarterback to make a mistake. That's one of the ultimate team statistics. And that's what I'm looking for, is guys who care about those team statistics. Offensive linemen who say, yeah, we want to rush for 300 yards a game. Defensive linemen who say, yeah, I want my linebackers to make 12 tackles because I'm getting double teamed because I'm just, that big of a dude. So that's kind of my ideal player. Not overly big, but a guy who's, might be hair undersized, which irritates him, and he plays with that nasty streak. A guy who can pick up the concepts we're throwing at him, but a guy, more importantly, who cares about the team versus the individual accolades.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I can tell you, sorry, John. I can tell you, I do not want to go up against that lineman that you just made.
That's fair.
John, what do you got?
Coach, I have been watching football all my life. I played in high school as well, and I got to ask, what do you think are the most important positions in, not just in high school football, but in all levels of the game? What do you think are the positions that you must have good players there, or else you will not have a good team? You mentioned the line. Anything else that you would say you must have good players there?
Yeah, I was going to say, except for line, because I think that's, heads above the rest. I think good lines build great programs. I think you've got to have a good quarterback. And I don't necessarily mean a quarterback who can go make all the throws, who can drop dimes in close. I mean, you got that guy. That's awesome. That makes life so much easier. But you need a guy who understands the game and can come back to you. And this was a big boon for me as a play caller. When I've had quarterbacks who can come back and say, hey, coach, this is what they're doing. This is what I think we should do. Awesome, man. Roll with it. You know what I mean? Having that guy who can kind of manage your offense, because it doesn't matter how high in the booth you sit. It doesn't matter what end zone camera you got. We're fortunate this year. We're working in one of these sideline replay systems that we can use to kind of help teach our guys. It doesn't matter how much of that you have. At the end of the day, it's the decisions that are being made pre-snap and post-snap on the field. And when you've got a quarterback who can come to you and say, hey, coach, these are the adjustments we need to make, awesome, So I think that is kind of imperative. I've seen great quarterbacks take average players and make them better. And I've seen quarterbacks who weren't as good make the team struggle. And so I think, it's kind of a cliche to say the quarterback is everything, but I really do think, especially in high school football where so much is run through the quarterback, it has to be done. Defensively, I'm going to say it's actually your back end players. I'm going to say when you've got a dude at free safety, when you've got a guy who can see the other 10 guys and get them lined up, I think that's a game changer. When we've had a solid safety in the past, our defense has been so much better. Why? Because he might be able to say, hey, it's a pass. Right? If I'm playing safety, I'm playing 12 yards off the ball. I can see the entire offense. If I've watched film, I know, hey, out of this alignment, this is what they're going to do. I can communicate that to my guys. When you start getting into that second level, which is just like linebackers, really you're just seeing that box, right? And sometimes it can be hard to figure out what teams are doing. So when you've got that, the safety playing back there and saying, hey, we need to make these adjustments. Kind of like I just said with the quarterback. He comes to the sideline, tells the D coordinator, hey, coach, they're doing this and we're not adjusting. All right, cool. You need to make sure everybody adjusts. And then, they can play the pass, they can get in coverage, or they can come up and stick a guy and run game. High school football is all about stopping the run defensively. So when you've got a safety who's willing to come up there and stick his head in, it really allows you to do a lot of things defensively that you can't do if you've got a guy who's just a coverage dude. So I think those are probably, other than line, because I stand by that. I think quarterback and a back end safety. I think those are kind of the two most important positions. I think at the end of the day, you need all 11 positions doing their job. But, if I was to narrow it down, it'd be those two spots.
Great. John, Liz, you guys got any final questions? I only have one more.
I'm good.
You good, John? You good? All right, Coach, this is my final question. So we've talked a lot about, whether it be X's and O's or philosophies or your coaching style, really focusing on the program as a whole. However, for this final question, how have you been able to use quarantine to improve yourself?
So this has actually been a double-edged sword, and I'll get into this because I think this is interesting, and I don't know if a lot of coaches would admit to this. It's been great because I have had the time to look at ideas from all over the place. There's been so many Zoom clinics. It's great. Typically you're kind of hamstrung by clinic season. I maybe only get to the Baltimore Glacier, or, Western Maryland has a fantastic high school football coaches clinic. Those are the only two clinics we went to. But now because of quarantine, everybody said, well, you know what, we'll have Zoom clinics. So you were able to do things, able to be exposed to all these new ideas and all these new concepts. It's been great. At the same time, there's been all these Zoom meetings and all these Zoom clinics, and there's almost this overwhelming amount of information. So what I've kind of done during this quarantine is I've said, okay, I've been exposed to all this information. All of it works. And I think that's something to understand is everything works. It all depends, it's that old saying, it's not your X's and O's, it's your Jimmys and Joes. It's all about what can your dudes do? What can your team do? So I might say, hey, I really like that idea from whatever coach from whatever state. I want to use that. But if my guys can't do it, then what's the purpose? So what I've tried to do is go through all the information I've been exposed to and say, do I really like this? No. Okay. Is this something we can do? Yes. All right. Maybe we'll include it. I've also taken the time to, again, not so much focus on the X's and O's. Well, I've certainly done that, but been talking to coaches about practice plans. How do you schedule practice plans? How do they schedule and build their practice plan to maximize time efficiency and to also make sure that guys are constantly moving? And then I actually saw something today, just flipping through Twitter, a coach asking, hey, do you guys do this certain thing during practice? And I thought to myself, we've never done that, but I think that's something we could do that would help our guys. So it's just, that's kind of what I've been looking more into, not so much the X's and O's aspect of things. Mostly because I'm getting away from that. I'm not going to call my own plays. I'm still the special teams coordinator. So I have looked at some special teams stuff, which I know, really exciting. That really moves the needle. But focusing more on, day-to-day operation stuff. There's a lot of successful head coaches out there. How do they do it? And then obviously the culture part of everything, I think is huge for me, looking at how other coaches build their culture. What do they do? There's a lot of tremendous podcasts out there about leadership and culture. So really tried to narrow it down to some of those and really listen and see what other programs are doing, whether it be nationwide, whether it be, in the state of Maryland, because we've got some great coaches right here in the Bayside Conference that I've looked at and said, okay, how do they do things and how can we emulate that on our end to try and be competitive with those teams? So that's kind of where I've looked at things, not so much X's and O's. And when it is X's and O's, like I said, just trying to go through that information, say, nah, we can't use this, or yeah, we can, just not be overwhelmed. But instead look at more like, the practical side of things, building our practice schedules, building our install schedule. How do we want to do it to maximize teaching? Because that's a big thing for us. I want my staff to be one of the best staffs in the state at teaching the game of football. So how can we maximize that teaching piece? And then how can we build the best culture that we can possibly have, which takes time, but the more I can learn now, the sooner we can roll it out, the sooner that part can start to develop.
Absolutely. Coach, thank you so much for joining us. I don't have any further questions. Liz, John, you guys good? Good. Coach, do you have any questions for us?
No, I thank you guys for having me on. I really do appreciate it. I like the idea of, just getting coaches from around and talk about whatever they do as coaches. Like I just talked about, I don't think we can ever learn too much in that regard. So look at what other coaches are doing and try and work it in what I can with my program.
Absolutely. Coach, once again, thank you so much, and stay safe, stay healthy, and good luck this season.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.